Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for being here with me. It is really delightful to have you here. I apologize once again for not being able to do the episode last week, but hopefully we're back on track now for good. So thanks for being here with me. Hopefully this one is better than the first one I did that didn't record. It usually works out that way, right? I think so. So tonight we are talking about something that has really gotten my attention, and it's getting the attention of a lot of people recently, especially in these last couple of years during the pandemic, when so many people have been doing a lot of soul searching, a lot of reading, a lot of YouTube binging, learning about a lot of things. We're going to be talking tonight about the subject, gods and monsters, the lost supernaturalism of the Bible. And we're going to be focusing a lot on the research of one particular scholar that I'm going to introduce you to. I hope that a lot of you haven't heard of him, so that I can tell you a little bit about his work. And I would really encourage you to seek out his work because it really is mind-changing. I actually wrote an introduction to this because I just wanted to focus my thoughts and make sure that I set it up properly so that you know exactly what I'm trying to do. So the first thing I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is just read this to you. And so for that, I'm going to put on my glasses, and it's just like 2 pages long. So it's not going to be that boring. We filter things constantly in order to survive. We filter out past bad memories, thoughts about ourselves that make us feel like failures, fears about the future, things that don't fit in with our worldview, so many things. Because each of us has a unique worldview that has been created from all different kinds of unique influences and experiences, we also all have a unique filter that efficiently processes everything that we observe in an instant, throwing out what doesn't fit with our worldview or our paradigm and keeping what does. We become so efficient at this that after a while, we don't even see many of the things that don't fit with our worldview. Such is the case with the majority of Christians when we read the Bible. We come upon many passages in our readings or hearing the scriptures read at Mass or services, and we vaguely hear certain passages that strike us, or would if we actually still heard them, as strange, esoteric, or just downright weird. Dr. Michael is an Old Testament scholar and ancient languages expert. And he has made it his life's work to force himself and others to take a long, hard look at what he calls the weird stuff in the Bible. In order to do this, Dr. Heiser goes back to the original texts and reads them in their original languages. He has also worked long and hard to understand the worldviews of these ancient peoples who wrote the scriptures so that he can take us through the Bible from the viewpoint of them, not us. Makes sense, right? The difference between them and us is often deeply underestimated. We call ourselves enlightened, right? For the Enlightenment. And supposedly we are living in a superior intellectual time with a superior worldview to those who came before the 18th century Enlightenment. We have classified in our enlightened view, many former beliefs as myths, and have translated many facts into what we call symbols. Now, I'm a lifelong Catholic, as a lot of you know, and even I see many of our priests and bishops in the church today, including those like the very famous Bishop Robert Barron, talking about Adam and Eve as not being real people, for example, and many other parts of the Old and New Testaments being only symbols of deeper meanings. But this is not overall what the ancients who wrote these scriptures intended. For the most part, they were writing history. They were writing what actually happened. I first encountered Dr. Heiser about a year ago during a time of my own soul searching amidst the pandemic. I was wrestling with my long career, 35 years now, of being a paranormal investigator. And I was seriously trying to understand what parts of it, if any, had been acceptable for me to participate in as a Christian, and if any, what parts were forbidden by the church. I thought a lot about all of the different things that I had done, all of the different methods of investigation that I had used, a lot of the dangerous ground that I had entered, and the many truly dark things that had happened to me, some of which I barely escaped. More on that later. I had been watching a lot of YouTube videos about spirit possession, exorcism, and a lot of videos about near-death experiences where people talked about dying and going to heaven or hell, much more frequent than you hear about. I also attended some online seminars on UFO experiences, and I began to notice many similarities between possession experiences and what people refer to as alien visitations. And I realized that some of these kinds of experiences had actually happened in my own family, and more on that next week, actually. I was starting to see that while I had always believed in angels and demons, of course, or good angels and bad demons more correctly, there seemed to be a lot more ways in which these beings come into contact with us than I realized. And it began to seem that there was something a lot bigger going on than just Adam and Eve fell and Jesus came a long time later to fix it. Okay, which is basically what we're taught, right? During all this reflection and binge watching, I came across a seminar that Dr. Heiser did at a place called Celebration Church. You know, he's an evangelical, and this was an evangelical church. The seminar had over 1 million views and stretched for 4 segments, each of which were hours long. So I started to watch it, and I couldn't stop watching it once I started. There are those moments in life that are simply mind-blowing, right? That's what we call them. The moments when everything you thought before just seems to literally shatter your entire view, literally be shattered in an instant. And listening to Dr. Heiser the first time was the most mind-shattering moment in my life, hands down. Now, if you are a Christian, you know that the Bible is filled with all sorts of these bizarre events that justify understanding. Things like in Genesis 6, when the so-called sons of God come down to earth to mate with human women, creating a race of giants called the Nephilim. Like all the parts during the Exodus and beyond, when God tells the Israelites to kill like tens of thousands of people. Like the Great Flood, when God wipes out the entire human race, which he claims to love. How do you reconcile these things? If you are like me and like most people, you have just told yourself, well, paraphrasing the Bible, his ways are not our ways, right? His thoughts are not our thoughts. We are just humans and we don't understand what God does a lot of the time. As Paul says later, we see through as like in a mirror right now, darkly, but later, we'll understand everything. But that is not, I discovered, necessarily the case with the Bible. What if the Bible is history, all of it, literal history that is understandable, but we just haven't had the tools to understand it because of our so-called enlightened worldview? What if it's because we've been looking at it from the perspective of this post-enlightenment and not the way it was written, not the perspective from which it was written, and that is in the ancient world? Well, that's Dr. Heiser's theory, and his book, The Unseen Realm, and a second book, Supernatural, which is kind of like the Unseen Realm non-scholarly version, provides the perspective to unlock all of these weird mysteries of the Bible. And as you listen to or read Dr. Heiser, the whole history of humanity and of the church seems to unlock itself as you go. With every chapter, more of the mystery is peeled away. And it's like all these missing pieces that you didn't understand before, they're just all put into place. It's amazing. And you finally understand what it's all about, what humanity is about, what our relationship with God is about, what's really going on here with the supernatural world. You realize that this story is still going on. this long story that's been going on since before the creation of humanity, of the universe. And there are powers and forces interacting with us every day that are part of this story. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, the lost supernaturalism of the Bible. And we're going to be talking about specifically the research of Dr. Heiser. Let me just get into some slides here so you have something else to look at besides myself. Where is my PowerPoint? Oh, here it is. Okay, great. All right. So here's Dr. Heiser, and incidentally, or not incidentally, by the way, Dr. Heiser was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year. I'm not sure how he's doing right now. He was keeping people updated, but there hasn't been a post from him since I think November. So please pray for him. He was planning a long series of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, and then supposedly is supposed to have surgery in June, May or June. So like I said, I don't know what's going on. I will put a link in the comments in case you want to donate to his fundraiser for his medical expenses. But at any rate, let's move on. The basis of Dr. Heiser's research and his kind of theory about everything is something called the Divine Counsel Worldview. And these are his two books. Divine Counsel Worldview is this worldview that some biblical scholars take, that basically there's more than one God. God, Yahweh, the creator, the God of everything, our God, the one true God. He is the almighty, all-powerful, all-creating God. But there are other gods below him. And those gods sit on a divine council. And God, the one God, Yahweh, consults with them when he wants to do something. There's one passage in the book of Job that is usually used to back this theory up, where God consults the divine council to decide what to do with somebody. But there are other areas in the Bible where God refers to we when he's talking about taking some kind of action. And the one that most people are familiar with is at the creation of the universe, when God says, let us make man in our image. But then God creates man, right? God creates everything, because even though God consults the divine council, only he can create. Dr. Heiser, at the root of his methodology is to look at the original text of the scriptures. So he goes into the ancient Hebrew, the ancient Greek, the ancient languages, and he looks at the exact words so that he knows exactly what the writer meant when he was talking about it. And he said, like, his eyes were open to all of this when he was at a conference. I think it was up in Milwaukee or in Wisconsin, and he was talking to a colleague before the speaker began, and his colleague said, if you ever want to blow your mind, read this passage in the Psalms in the original language. So Dr. Heiser did, and he said his eyes were absolutely open, because the passage referred to Elohim, gods, in the plural. I think that the passage that says in the midst of the gods, but he sits in the midst of the gods. And Dr. Heiser said, whoa, this is referring to other gods. This is referring to some kind of a pantheon, the kind of pantheon that we saw in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, where there's all these different gods under, a main god. This was, sorry, my phone does that even when the sound's turned off. So he began to look little by little at the scriptures through the prism, through the lens of the original languages that they were written in. And he began to see that as he did that, kind of like puzzle after puzzle after puzzle piece came together, and all of these things that didn't make sense anymore suddenly made sense. So the divine counsel theory, there is more than one God. This flies in the face of everything that we've ever been taught, right? As Christians, there's only one true God. There is only one true God. And Dr. Heiser shows throughout the scriptures that in references to the Messiah, to Jesus, to, the one who is to come, that Jesus is referred to differently than the other sons of God. So these sons of God that sit on the divine council are also sons of God, but Jesus is unique. There's a special word for Jesus that means that he is unique. There is no other like him. So it's very interesting. Okay, so the divine council. Okay, secondly, there was more than one rebellion. Now we always talk about, the rebellion of Lucifer. And we hear about this from the book of Revelation. There was a great battle in heaven. And this was the battle before the creation of the universe, when St. Michael comes onto the scene and battles Lucifer. And you see him here with his foot on the head of Satan, which we call him now since he fell. God gave him the name Lucifer. So we do not call him Lucifer anymore because he's not worthy of that name. In this rebellion, according to, kind of tradition, at least in the Catholic Church, and a lot of the other Protestant churches, when Lucifer fell, he took a third of the angels with him. And so we have roaming the earth, a third of the angels that God created are allowed by God to roam the earth and prey on souls, to tempt people into sin so they can drag them down to hell with them. And this is a whole nother Bible class. And when we talk about the free will that God gave to all of his creatures, that we have the free will to choose to do right, and we're not forced into doing it. And that applies to the angels too. Dr. Heiser says there was more than one rebellion, and it's all, in the Bible. There were actually 3 rebellions. The first one was, this great battle in heaven. We can also talk about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden as, a battle, but was more of something that Satan did, as part of kind of his whole thing. And it wasn't really, this similar to the other battles or rebellions that we're talking about. But also in Genesis 6, that passage that I read earlier talks about the sons of God came down to earth from heaven. They found human women desirable. They lusted after them and they mated with them. They had, so we have a case of angels or these divine beings having sex with human women and creating this race of beings called the Nephilim. And we're told throughout the Bible that the Nephilim was this race of giants that came from this union of the gods, these minor gods coming down to earth, or fallen angels, and mating with human women. And we just decided, in our modern era that this didn't happen. It's a symbol for something. It's a story. It means something else. We don't know what it means, but it means something else. It's a legend. It's a myth, just like the ancient Greek myths about gods mating with human women, or just like the ancient Roman myths about gods mating with human women. And then you start to think, why is it that all of these different cultures have the same story, that gods came down to earth and mated with human women? Maybe because it actually happened. Could be, right? Well, that's what Dr. Heiser thinks, that he has looked through all of these ancient texts, from all these different cultures in the ancient world, and found that all of these instances, and he's not the only one to have done this, but all of these instances of these, hallmark events in the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, are reflected in all of these other ancient cultures, including this idea that gods came down from heaven and mated with human women. So something interesting to think about for sure. Now, according to this tradition and this theory, there's a lot of evidence also across cultures that when the gods came down to mate with humans, they also introduced, this was when they introduced to humanity the forbidden knowledge, basically occult knowledge, herbalism, witchcraft, weaponcraft, all of, psychic ability, all these different things that we think about as a cult now. These were things that were introduced to humanity by these fallen gods or fallen angels when they mated with human women. And so this was knowledge that it wasn't the original corruption of humanity. Of course, that was in the Garden of Eden, but this escalated the corruption of humanity. All of this forbidden knowledge, that was kind of hidden secret knowledge that was reserved for the divine beings. This was going to escalate the corruption of humanity now. Now, something else that we see, between the lines all through the Old Testament is this problem with the Nephilim, this offspring, this giant race of giants that came from this mating of gods and humans. And when we look at the Old Testament in the context of, through the lens of this problem of the Nephilim bloodline, the whole Old Testament and actually the whole story of Christianity makes a lot more sense. Because when you look at this, you realize that all of these instances when God sent the flood, when God told Moses to kill, tens of thousands of people when they were out in the desert. Dr. Heiser believes that the reason that God gave these commands and did these things and sent the flood was to wipe out the Nephilim, that tainted bloodline that came from the divine beings mating with humans. And this is because the Messiah, Jesus, the Christ, could not be born into a bloodline that was tainted. He had to be fully human. So again, God's attempt to wipe out the bloodline through the sending of the flood, and then also through directing the killing of these other races of people when Moses was out in the desert. And a lot of other instances, there seems to be this read between the lines thing where God is trying to get rid of certain people or groups of people, tribes, etc., to cleanse this bloodline. So a lot of people ask that have gotten into this, so what happened to the Nephilim? Well, we know that the Nephilim survived the flood because when Moses and the Israelites were out in the desert, Moses sent spies ahead into the promised land, and they came back and said, oh, it's beautiful, it's great, it's wonderful. There's only one problem. There's Nephilim living there. So somehow the Nephilim had survived the flood, and scholars believe that one of Moses's children or stepchildren had or in-law children had that blood in them, and it was able to, the Nephilim were able to continue. So what happened to the Nephilim? Where are they now? You hear these stories from time to time about giants' remains being found and things like this. Some people, I've done a lot of research lately into the missing 411 phenomenon that was talked about last week. There are some researchers who believe that these Bigfoot creatures are the Nephilim, and they continue to mate, continue to live. They've been living out in the elements for so long, thousands of years, that they have fur all over their bodies now, but that they are half human and half divine. And this is why they have abilities like to A lot of researchers believe they have abilities to hypnotize people. They have psychic abilities to know when someone's coming, which is why they've been able to elude for so long. Perhaps they can shift shape. Perhaps they can, appear as something else, like the angels can appear as humans. Maybe they can appear as someone else. When you start to think about this, there's so many interesting possibilities. So Bigfoot is our Bigfoot, the Nephilim, living among us today in the wilderness, in our modern world. Dr. Heiser believes a lot of people tend to group all malevolent spirits as demons. Dr. Heiser believes that there are demons, fallen angels, and then there are evil spirits. He calls the evil spirits the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So the Nephilim, when they die, because they cannot go to heaven, obviously, or purgatory, because they're not ever going to heaven, they are, sort of wander the earth in this disembodied form. And he thinks that this could explain a lot of things. When we refer to evil spirits, even talking about things like haunted houses and a lot of the negative experiences we have in like haunted houses, haunted places that are not, demonic experiences, but they're definitely experiences with some kind of disembodied entity that's out there. So he believes that there's these two kinds of malevolent entities, the demons, the fallen angels, and then the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. I was going to say one more thing that I just forgot, but it will come back to me. Oh, yes, the Watchers. A lot of people talk about the Watchers and wonder about the Watchers. And we see this idea of these Watchers, not only in the Hebrew Old Testament and in Christian tradition, but also in other ancient cultures. There are even buildings in the ancient other ancient cultures where, I think it's Mesopotamia, where there are these figures of the Watchers, these Watchers that are carved into the base of some of their buildings. Now, the Watchers are a portion of the angels. These were angels that were assigned to watch over humanity when humanity was created. So God assigned a portion of the angels to watch over the human race. In fact, it's believed that Lucifer had this assignment. Lucifer was given the assignment to watch over the human race, members of the human race. And Lucifer was already so angry that God was creating the human race, because, as a lot of people don't realize, humans are higher than the angels. God created humans to be higher than the angels. Paul reminds us in the Gospels that, or in the New Testament, that we are higher than the angels, and we will reign with God. We will rule with God. We are sons and daughters of God. We are higher than these beings. Well, Lucifer, as you know, was the smartest, brightest, most beautiful of all the angels. And he was so disgusted that he was being put below this new race of beings that God was creating. And then when God said, you're going to have to, I'm sending you basically to serve us, he wasn't having that. And so that's when the rebellion happened. Where are the Watchers today? Well, some of them are good and some of them are evil, of course, because not all of the Watchers rebelled. We have our guardian angels. We have, people who watch over our nations. Not people, angels who watch over our nations, our families, our projects, our churches, whatever. But then we have a lot of these Watchers who did become corrupted and fall. So there's good Watchers, bad Watchers, good Watchers, evil Watchers, and they're still around. So all Watchers are angels, but not all angels are Watchers. If that makes sense. Now, this big mess that's created when, through all of these rebellions that we've talked about, It comes to a head at the Tower of Babel. Remember the Tower of Babel? Like everybody was still one race at that time, speaking one language. And people decided they were going to build, basically a tower to go up to heaven, and be like God. And when God saw that this was happening, we all know he got really, really angry about it. Apparently people didn't learn from, the Garden of Eden that this would make God angry. So what were we taught about the Tower of Babel growing up as Christians, whether in Catholic school, Christian school, Sunday school, we were taught that the Tower of Babel is when the nations were formed, right? God made people speak all different languages and they couldn't understand each other, so they couldn't finish building their tower. So that's basically as all we get when we're taught about the Tower of Babel. Oh, this is how the languages started, and this is how the different nations and races started. Okay. Here's what is in the Bible that we just read over that we've never really looked at before, was that when God splits all these people into different languages and different nations, he divided them according to, quote, the number of the sons of God. So when God created the nations, he broke up this one original unified people into nations and assigned a different God to rule, or a bunch of different gods to be in charge of each one. And by this time, we know some of those were fallen. There were demons, basically. So at the Tower of Babel, God actually put demons in charge of at least some of the nations, if not all of them. I'm not sure at that point how many of the sons of God had fallen, but we think it was pretty much bad people, bad angels, demons that were put in charge of the nations, because God was really, really angry at the entire human race. And it was at the Tower of Babel, he said, basically, I'm done with you. I'm done. And he splits up all the people. He puts demons in charge of all of us. And then he creates his nation, the nation of Israel, calls Abraham, and the nation of Israel begins. So he creates his own people because the rest of us were such a dismal disappointment at every turn. So the Tower of Babel, a very, very important event that happened when literally demons were put in charge of each one of the nations. And we see this in a lot of the, that's the mating of the gods and the humans, the Nephilim, Tower of Babel. Here we are. A lot of the modern experts in spirit possession and exorcism, such as on your screen here, Father Malachi Martin. He was a very famous Jesuit exorcist and author. And on the right here, Father Chad Ripperger, who was a very popular Catholic exorcist and evangelizer. You can see like his YouTube channel. Father Martin passed away some years ago. Some people think that he actually was targeted by one of the demons that he had exorcised. Very interesting story. There's a great documentary on Netflix called Hostage to the Devil about this. And it's a great book, Hostage to the Devil, which we'll talk about in another segment. One of the best books about parapsychology and demonic possession. Definitely the best book about demonic possession. But both of these priests talk about this idea that each nation, cities, regions, families even, can have demons that are in charge of them. It's almost like they're a mascot or something. And I was just reading the other day, or listening to one of Father Ripperger's talks, and he had talked about there being this demon of Fresno, California. He says it's well known that there's this particularly malicious demon that oversees Fresno, which is really interesting because, like I said, I've been doing a lot of the missing 411 stuff lately, and Fresno, California, including Yosemite National Park, right? We talked about the cluster areas of the disappearances last week. Yosemite, which is basically Fresno, is the number one cluster where the most disappearances happen. And there are a lot of other strange things there at Yosemite, serial killers, individual murders, ghosts and hauntings, all UFO stuff, Bigfoot stuff, all kinds of weird things. It makes you wonder, is this all connected somehow to this geographic area? So what happens? Well, God's got to fix all this, right? And of course, God knows from the beginning of creation that he's going to have to fix all this. And this is all in place before, the first breath is breathed by God, the creation of the universe. But this all starts to get fixed at a physical place, just like all this other stuff happened at physical places. It really happened. I've come to believe this, all of these things that we've talked about really happened. Everything starts to come back together right here at this mountain, Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon, we never even were taught about it. Mount Hermon was the place where in the Gospels, right before Jesus went to Jerusalem to die, he took his disciples to this mountain and he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, they say you're a prophet, you're, Elijah, a great teacher or whatever. And Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And at that moment, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Now, Catholics have always taught that this was the moment that Jesus appointed Peter as the first pope of the church. And Protestants say that it was actually Peter's faith that Jesus was talking about, that Peter's faith that he was the Son of God, the Messiah, that faith was the rock upon which Jesus was going to build his church. Dr. Heiser says, what if he meant this rock, this actual rock, this mountain that I brought you to today, Mount Hermon? I'm going to start to build my church right here on this mountain. Well, why does that make sense? It makes sense because all through many, many generations in that geographical area, Mount Hermon had been known as the very place, the physical place, the mountain where the sons of God came down in Genesis 6 to bring the forbidden knowledge and mate with human women. So right before he goes to Jerusalem to die and rise and begin the Christian church and the salvation of humanity, Jesus brings his disciples to the very spot where it all started to go wrong, where humanity began to fall and be corrupted. And he says, right here, I'm going to start to put the human family back together. Interesting, isn't it? So the books, this information, there's a lot of stuff to unpack. This is the basic outline of Dr. Heiser's kind of theory about everything. And we're going to look more carefully at the Watchers. We're going to look more carefully at the Nephilim. We're going to look more carefully at all of this in context of other supernatural phenomena that's going on out there to see how much of it kind of syncs up and lines up. But I want to go back and just show you really quickly again the two main books. Dr. Heiser has written a number of books now. But these are the two main ones. The Unseen Realm was the first one, and that was it's more scholarly, but it's still very accessible. But it does go into a lot of the ancient languages more and things like that. Supernatural is kind of the Unseen Realm light, so it's lighter reading, but it's the same material. He specifically wrote Supernatural to appeal, so it would appeal to a wider audience. And then there's other books too. There's book just about demons, called Demons. There's a book called Reversing Hermon, which is just about, exactly about what we talked about, the sons of God coming down to earth at Mount Hermon and what God did to reverse that. Going back to how the nations were scattered at the Tower of Babel, how demons were put in charge of everything. One thing I just wanted to point out too, and we'll talk about this more another day too, like, when you really look at all of these other ancient cultures and you see like, okay, gods came down and mated with humans, and this race of powerful giants came to be, and hear the stories about like Hercules and the other gods, and these come from union in the myths, so-called myths, Greek myths, Roman myths, Egyptian myths, etc. We hear about these stories, this mating that results in a race of powerful giants. And it really, really, again, it really makes you think, have we just decided to believe that this is all myth when it was never meant to be written that way or to be understood that way? At any rate, okay. So gods and monsters, check. We're gonna meet again next week. Let me get rid of this really quickly so I can talk to you. And we're going to be talking next week about, I told you I did a lot of soul searching over the last few years, and it all started when my mother passed away in 2017, I believe 2018, and something happened to me. And it led me to believe that there was something had happened to me and that I had something spiritual that was wrong with me. And it led me to seek out a lot of different kinds of help, including something called remote spirit release therapy, which will, I think, really interest you. Not only what it is, but what happened to me when after I had it done. So we'll be talking about that next week, and that's going to start us into talking a lot about spirit attachment and demonic possession and all of that good stuff. So see you back here next Thursday. And thank you so much for joining me. If you like this, please like it, please subscribe to it, and please, would you share it with everybody everywhere so more people can come here, because I really want more people to come here and to listen to these programs and to learn about what I think are a lot of valuable things that I've discovered about keeping ourselves safe spiritually as we try to maneuver this strange world that's a lot stranger than anything we could invent, I think. All right, thank you guys. I will see you next week, and have a great night, afternoon, day, whenever it is for you. Take good care.